very much for coming out to what is the first event of a busy week for the New York University Abu Dhabi Institute. It is a busy week for Abu Dhabi and the Emirates. I think there isn't a hotel room unfilled in the city and probably in Dubai, which is saying something. This week, we are especially appreciative that among the many events going on this week in the city, you have chosen to come to this public conversation on social entrepreneurship. We too have more than that going on this week. We have, starting on Tuesday, running Tuesday through Thursday in this very auditorium, a major conference on education, media and human development, sponsored by one of the major schools of New York University, in New York, the School of Education. You are very welcome to attend that. Obviously, tonight's topic relates deeply to the very topics of education, media and human development. If you're interested, ask us more after the event. We will start here at 9 o'clock every day, and we will conclude with a very exciting panel on Thursday from 5 to 7, a panel called In the Public Eye, Media and Civil Society in the Arab World. Of course, a topic of enormous interest and social significance, as we all know. But I am here really to introduce tonight's event, this public conversation on social entrepreneurship, for which I'm happy to say two of New York University's finest in this field, and really finest in the world, have come all the way from New York, and I'm tremendously grateful to Paulette and Gabriel Broadbar for being here. Social entrepreneurship, I imagine you have some idea of what it means. I think we will learn from them really how it applies, and I know they're very interested in talking with you, the audience, about the concepts. I think perhaps one way to describe it is the study and the actual creation of really the creation of structures and processes and institutions that can affect meaningful change, meaningful social change in a sustainable way. And of course, these structures and institutions require, even to begin and to be run, require leadership of many kinds by social entrepreneurs, and different kinds of partnerships, between institutions of business, education, government agencies, development agencies, arts institutions, the media, housing departments, and so forth. And both Gabriel Broadbar and Paulette have broad experience in a wide range of these kinds of institutions and working with them, and of course are very involved in the academic study as well of these kinds of partnerships. Social entrepreneurship is a very big and important field at NYU, which is itself a quite socially entrepreneurial institution, you could say. The leadership of the field at NYU resides in the Wagner School of Public Service, where both Gabriel and Paul are. And we hope very much that this field of study, still a nascent field of study and social activity, will be represented in New York University Abu Dhabi once we open our undergraduate college to students in 2010. As I think many of you have heard me say before, the New York University Abu Dhabi Institute is just the pioneer and the first entity establishing New York University's presence as a research university here. We really are going to be an institution not just for the creation and dissemination of research in this way. We will also very much be a teaching institution and admit students in 2010. And social entrepreneurship, which will require academic study as well as direct engagement in the community, something that we're very eager to participate in here, I hope will very much be on one field on its agenda. I want to thank both of you again for being here. Let me briefly introduce Gabriel Broadbar, who is there. You raise your hand. That's Gabe right there. Gabe, by deduction, they must have figured that out. Gabe is director of the Catherine B. Reynolds Foundation Program in Social Entrepreneurship in the Wagner School of Public Service, a very innovative scholarship program that involves students directly in social entrepreneurial activity, even as they are in school. He was before, I told you he's worked in a broad variety of areas. Just to mention a couple of things, he was director of the Office of Housing Policy and Development in New York City, obviously in the city a tremendously important agency, and has for many years worked with high schools at risk, high school students, particularly high school students at risk of dropping out, and so forth. He did that in Houston as well as New York City. I'm delighted that he is back here. This is a repeat visit for Gabriel. He was here last spring with us, involved in the selection of our first class of Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed scholars. These are university scholars at UAE University, at the higher colleges of technology, and at Zayed University, who are taking some special classes with New York University President John Sexton on the alignment or disalignment, as it may be, in issues of religion and government in the United States, and how the Supreme Court has handled that. That is a course they're taking all year long. And normally there are many of them at our events, and the only reason they are not tonight is that they're in the United States right now. They're on a special trip there where they will actually meet justices of the Supreme Court and a whole host of other kinds of government and university leaders and institutional leaders in the States. But Gabe, that was really the point of saying it, Gabe was here involved in the selection of these scholars, and really it was a wonderful opportunity for us to get to know very early on the potential, frankly, for social entrepreneurship here, because several of these students spoke very meaningfully about this in the selection procedure, and were in fact asked to think of social entrepreneurial activity as part of the selection process, and they did, I thought, extremely well at that. Okay, I've said more than enough. Paulette is Paulette Goddard, professor in New York University's Wagner School of Public Service, and I think many of you will have read him. If not his many books, you will have read him probably in the New York Times or the Washington Post. He is a great expert on government, on civil support structures, also known as bureaucracy, I suppose, non-profit organizations, and of course social entrepreneurship. But Gabe will introduce him a little bit more fully. Thank you very much again for joining us. Okay.
Well, welcome everybody. It really is a great honor and a pleasure for me to be here and have the opportunity to participate in this discussion with Professor Paulette, who really is one of the leading thought architects on social entrepreneurship. You really can't talk about this field without Paul's name coming up at some point. And to give you an idea of his reach in this field, I want to tell you a very quick story. A few weeks ago, I was up in the mountains of the Catskills in New York State, and I was sitting on my living room couch actually writing Paul an email about this event. And the second I hit the send button, I literally hear Paul talking to me from my kitchen. And he's talking about the government's role in how to solve social problems. And I flip out. I think I have finally snapped. I'm working way too hard, and now I'm hallucinating. And after about a minute of sitting there and kind of contemplating what my life was going to be like with Paul permanently stuck in my head, I get up and I walk into the kitchen and thankfully hear the host of the radio program I had on say, "I'd like to thank my very special guest, Paulette." So fortunately, he is actually with us today in person for real. And again, it really is an honor because Paul probably has done more to either define the term social entrepreneurship or at least inform the discussion of the term social entrepreneurship. And in so doing, he's helped to bring some structure and clarity to what at best had been this kind of amorphous, undefined notion of how to do good in the world. And I really think he's done so in a way that's backed by solid evidence, as has been demonstrated in his most recent book, In Search of Social Entrepreneurship. He's a prolific author. He's written 21 or so other books on topics such as Veterans Affairs, Social Security, the role of the Vice President, setting the presidential agenda. As you heard, he's a regular contributor to the Washington Post, and also a regular guest on radio programs, television shows, and occasionally my head. So welcome, Professor Paulette.
Thank you.
So I guess to get us started, since I've just credited you with doing more than anybody on the planet to define the term social entrepreneurship, maybe you could get us started by talking a little bit about the term, what your understanding of it is, where it comes from.
Well, thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've enjoyed my trip. It's a little bit of a quick turnaround kind of trip, but I suspect I'll be recovering from the jet lag arriving after I get home, waiting to recover from the jet lag from returning. At any rate, Gabe's very generous. You are kind of crazy anyway. I mean, whether you're hearing me on the radio or not. I've been working on this concept for a couple of years now. I am not a veteran of the study of social entrepreneurship. In fact, I got pulled into the conversation about it as a skeptic. I basically felt that it was not a concept worth studying, that it was really not a field, and it is not yet a field. It is so early in its development and so weak on its research that it really has quite some distance to go. It's a very popular term of use today. The Gates Foundation, the Clinton Global Initiative, a lot of the high-tech funders are all investing in what they call social entrepreneurship. And I began my journey toward understanding what they were talking about, or towards trying to give some structure to it so that I could understand it, by writing an article that basically said we've got a cult of personality surrounding this term, that we tend to celebrate these heroic entrepreneurs who seek social change of some kind or another, and the obvious example is Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Peace Prize 2 years ago for his work with the Grameen Bank, which is a big microfinance lender in Bangladesh. And no doubt about it, it's a very successful program, high rates of repayment, very successful in lifting women out of poverty. The notion being that social entrepreneurship has many of the characteristics of entrepreneurship more generally, which is that we're sweeping away the old with the new, that we are somehow altering the prevailing social or economic equilibrium and replacing it with a new equilibrium that reduces marginalization or brings new products to life. So when we start this conversation about social entrepreneurship, we have to start with the term entrepreneurship itself and argue that social entrepreneurship is one variant of entrepreneurship more generally. There's certainly business entrepreneurship. There are examples of government entrepreneurship where government actually is quite capable of innovation. It's difficult for government to innovate because of the bureaucratic pressures, but we do see examples of government efforts to solve very difficult social problems. You have social entrepreneurship, political entrepreneurship. They're all part of a general class of behavior that involves an effort to sweep away the status quo, to challenge the prevailing wisdom, to prove that something is possible in terms of solving a problem, and thereby wash away the prevailing equilibrium. In this case of social entrepreneurship, the social equilibrium, which for many people who study social entrepreneurship involves the marginalization of certain populations, the inability to solve particular problems like malaria or HIV/AIDS, the lack of access to clean water, efforts to increase and enhance agricultural production so that you can eliminate hunger, sort of the notion being that we're not in the endeavor of treating problems so much as we are in the effort to eliminate problems entirely. So the general definition that we are using now is some sort of an effort, innovative in tone, pattern breaking in tone, to resolve and eliminate a prevailing social problem that has proven difficult to solve in the past. Very simple definition. We can go into more depth about the whole notion of equilibrium changing, but kind of a general term about solving problems rather than treating problems. And there's a little bit of an edge in there, kind of a denigration almost of those who are involved in treating as opposed to solving. So we can mix that up a little bit. But you know, in this journey of trying to describe and understand social entrepreneurship, I've really been exploring the underlying assumptions we make about what social entrepreneurship is, what the entrepreneur is, or who he or she is, or who they are, what they do, how they behave, what makes them different, and our core assumptions about entrepreneurs in general and social entrepreneurs in specific that sometimes trap us into the search for a certain type of person or a certain type of approach that may not be helpful to us as we seek to expand our reach in solving difficult social problems.
Yeah, I think this notion that it is a hard thing to define, and there is still debate out there in terms of an exact definition is pretty accurate. Certainly if you Google social entrepreneurship, you're going to get a lot of different definitions. Terms like social venture, social enterprise will also come up, which are also sometimes a little challenging to define. It does seem that one thread that runs through these definitions, as you mentioned, is this notion of pattern breaking. And this notion that it involves addressing these underlying dynamics rather than treating the symptoms. That seems to have led to this sort of cult of newness around social entrepreneurship. It's this new thing, and if it's not new, it's not social entrepreneurship. What's your take on that? Can an old idea be socially entrepreneurial, or can an existing organization be socially entrepreneurial?
Well, this is where I've had a fairly significant argument with advocates of social entrepreneurship. There's some prevailing assumptions about the concept that are really quite limiting, one of which is that it's got to be new, everything new. The entrepreneur has to be new, unknown. The idea has to be new, can't exist before it becomes sort of a vision in the entrepreneur's mind. The organization has to be a startup, has to be small. And what we find when we actually start looking at patterns of entrepreneurship in the private sector or in government, or the existing case studies that we have of social entrepreneurship, we start to find that some of these assumptions are quite misleading. For example, does the entrepreneur have to be an individual? So I said, you know, basically that an entrepreneur could be a pair of people. It could be a team of people. It could be a network of individuals. It could be a very large group of individuals who work in an existing organizations. It need not be a new thing. It can be an existing organization that rejuvenates or starts to place resources into some sort of innovative activity, whether through an incubator of some sort or through heavy investment in research and development. And we really have to struggle with this, because the big problem in social entrepreneurship today is not necessarily the development of ideas for change, but the scale up and the growth of ideas for change to a level where there's actual impact. And that really involves partnerships or growth of organizations to what we sometimes think of as a scale of impossibility, that they can't quite they enter a period of breaking up, aren't they? That sometimes I do this, you know. I mean, it could be my voice. So this is not going to work for us. No. So. I love these lavalier mics, I really do, but let me just turn this off. My temptation, of course, when I have a microphone like this is to start singing. You know, yeah, like, you know, a lounge act in Las Vegas or wherever. So one of the issues that confronts social entrepreneurs today is that their programs tend to start small, they tend to involve heroic individuals, and they tend to start to experience very significant problems as they go to scale. The person who came up with the idea or began the process may not be the right person to take the idea to scale. You may need to profitize the idea in order to reach full impact. And so this kind of notion of newness, all things new, you know, is partially true to a point, but we need to make room for the possibility that existing organizations can innovate. Might be more difficult, but they are quite capable of innovation. We also need to deal with the notion that the entrepreneur is not necessarily a singular term. And we need to deal with this issue of scale. How do we get a good idea past the developmental stage where you have proof of concept to scalable change? And these are very significant problems that the field has yet to confront. What we're doing in the field of social entrepreneurship, and this is wonderful, there's a lot of cheerleading and hero celebrating going on. That's great. I mean, I think that's wonderful. And you meet some of these social entrepreneurs and you cannot help but be moved by their stories of 24/7 perseverance, of great risk, great personal sacrifice, great struggle against the odds. But the notion for the field, I think, is to say, well, does it have to be this difficult? Are there ways that we can enhance the infrastructure so that more ideas can be developed and scaled to impact? Do we really need the lone wolf innovator? Is that essential, or would we rather encourage teams and networks to generate the ideas that we hope will change the world, or so to speak? And these are all ideas that we're struggling with. So underneath this general embrace of a sort of common definition of social entrepreneurship are a set of assumptions we make about social entrepreneurship that may be at variance between different groups of people and funders and investors as they make their decisions about what they're going to support for a change effort.
Yeah, and this, I think your work has done a lot to help move the definition of social entrepreneurship away from this more exclusive kind of hero worship model to include more activity, more types of change makers, more individuals supporting the work of social entrepreneurs. There's still this notion, though, even in a more inclusive definition, around here are things that social entrepreneurs can be helped with, here are things that they can be taught, and here are some things that maybe the social entrepreneur has to come to the table with. So what are your thoughts on either side of that equation? Here are A, B, and C. If you want to be a social entrepreneur, you really need to have these things. On the other hand, here are things that organizations, governments might be able to help with.
Well, where I started out with this search, and this work has been funded by the Jeffrey Skoll Foundation, which is concerned with social entrepreneurship, and the Ewing, Marion Kaufman Foundation, which is concerned with business entrepreneurship. they're both very interested in heroic entrepreneurs. So the Skoll Foundation, if you go to their website, has a series of documentaries on the quote-unquote new heroes. So one of the arguments is that the core elements of the entrepreneur are so distinctly different from the rest of us that you can't be an entrepreneur unless you're born to be an entrepreneur. It's almost as if there's a genetic tracer for entrepreneurship. And you know, there is this notion that there's a Woody Allen gene. Do you know the Woody Allen gene, that, you know, that neuroticism is based on a pair of, well, I don't want to go into it. I'm so glad to see all the hospitals in Abu Dhabi. However, since Woody Allen would be overjoyed at being able to walk from block to block and have instant medical care available. At any rate, there is a debate about whether entrepreneurs have to operate by themselves, the lone wolf entrepreneur, and whether entrepreneurs in general are different, whether they think differently from the rest of high-achieving individuals. I mean, are they different from artists? Are they different from filmmakers? Are they different from scientists and engineers of one kind or another? Or are they similar? And then, can we do anything to increase the supply of entrepreneurship? One of my colleagues, Bill Drayton, who runs Ashoka, which is a fellowship granting organization for entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, argues that there's one entrepreneur per 10 million people. Now, that yields a rather small number of people that we would try to identify and bet on to change and solve social problems like malaria, for example. What we actually believe from the research is that there are more entrepreneurs, nascent entrepreneurs out there than the social entrepreneurship field acknowledges, and that we can teach a number of skills that are useful to the pursuit of socially entrepreneurial goals. Now, are social entrepreneurs in specific and entrepreneurs in general different from other high achievers? They appear to be so in several areas. One is just in sheer optimism. There is good research that suggests that entrepreneurs of all kinds have an almost blind optimism that what they are about to do will succeed. This optimism can border on overconfidence to the point where you have significant failure rates. We never talk about failure in social entrepreneurship. We don't talk much about it. Researchers who are working on it are trying to study social entrepreneurship using control groups and looking for failure, but nobody wants to talk about it. We only want to talk about success. But there is failure, and some of the most significant failures in social entrepreneurship and in entrepreneurship more generally involves overconfidence and bets against the future that are not sustained by reasonable tolerance of risk. I'll give you an example of an experiment that took place, or that was conducted a few years ago, in which 2 random samples, and all of our experiments in entrepreneurship are of college students. They're wonderful subjects. So you put them in a room and you run these experiments, and so you get 2 groups of college students in your experiment. You sit down with them, you give them a script, have them read a story about an idea they have for an entrepreneurial breakthrough. And they read the same script. And then one group is told nothing and asked what they will invest in the future of their idea. The second group is told that their idea is going to fail, that there is no chance whatsoever that their idea will succeed. 2 groups, randomly selected, randomized experiment, told the same idea, asked, one asked what they will do by way of future investment, the other with an intervention that says, whatever you do, you will fail. Which group invests more for the future? What's your guess? The first one? It's not true. The true entrepreneur, at least as measured through a series of characteristics and behaviors, will invest more than the non-entrepreneur because of this hubris about the possibility of success, this confidence, this optimism. Now, the question is whether or not we can help that entrepreneur who is going to invest more money in certain failure do a better job of estimating risk. You know, and I wish I had done a better job of estimating risk with my 401k over the past 6 to 9 months. So can we help them? Can we give them skills for understanding and building ideas that have a greater success rate? Can we help them harness their optimism productively? Can we even teach optimism? There's a debate underway in the conversation about entrepreneurship as to whether you can teach optimism. And how would you do that? Or are there just natural pessimists and natural optimists? So in all of my search for a set of characteristics that would distinguish the entrepreneur from the non-entrepreneur, optimism is a driving force. It helps explain perseverance. It helps explain the intense focus of the entrepreneur on moving forward with his or her idea. But other differences that we attribute to entrepreneurs, that they're more risk tolerant or that they're more creative, these do not necessarily prove out to be true. What appears to be essential in the decision to move forward with a socially entrepreneurial idea towards success is this enormous optimism about the future. And the creativity we can find in a number of different fields. You need that creativity to move forward, but it's the optimism that's driving you. And we can help harness that optimism more effectively, and we find that optimism in different places where entrepreneurship occurs, such as government. And then we get into the issue of funding and investing, the willingness for investors to take risks, and to invest in potential failure. If we continue to only look for success, it becomes less trial and error than trial for error. We expect 100% payout of our loans or our investments. That's not going to get us these social breakthroughs. We need to accept and tolerate failure and even celebrate failure. But we don't do that yet in the conversation about social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think as the field continues to grow, that this notion that, you know, some social entrepreneurial skills can be taught is certainly very encouraging to me as someone who runs a program at a university that purports to help teach social entrepreneurial skills, but also the proliferation of programs like Ashoka, which you mentioned, or other programs in the United States like Echoing Green and Drapier Richards. These are foundations that seek to find these folks and help support them in their work as they try to bring their ideas more fully to scale. The notion of the government's role in supporting social entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurial effort, not surprisingly, is also subject to debate. I participated in a dinner at a conservative think tank in New York, the Manhattan Institute, and their definition of social entrepreneurship, which I think a number of folks on the stage might disagree with, is the absence of government in solving social problems. Now, you just recently completed an editorial around the incoming Obama administration and their potential role within the social entrepreneurial community. Maybe you can talk a little bit about where you see the government's work in supporting individual social entrepreneurs or encouraging social entrepreneurial organizations?
Well, let me start by saying that one of the reasons we focus on the individual heroic entrepreneur is that many of the people who are engaged in the field are funding fellowships. And when you do a fellowship to an individual. And therefore, you start to look for social entrepreneurship under the street light. Okay? It's the old story about losing your car keys. The cop comes to the individual, the police officer comes to the individual who's searching under a street light, and the police officer says, "What are you looking for?" And he says, "My car keys." He said, "Where did you lose your car keys?" And he said, "Back in that alley, but there's no light. So I'm looking out here." And if we're searching for social entrepreneurship in individuals, then we're going to be looking for it there. But what we find is that one of the things we need to teach is teamwork. Most of the successful breakthroughs in business entrepreneurship have involved teams of individuals. Teams of individuals, as opposed to lone wolves, are much more likely to earn patents in the United States, for example. The vast majority of patents are produced by teams, not individuals. We have a lot of research on this, and so we can teach team skills. We can help people learn how to work together and start identifying individuals for our fellowships who have this basic skill to pull together teams. Now, to the Obama administration. The Obama administration has been talking at some length about getting the federal government involved in stimulating social entrepreneurship in our charitable sector. I don't think it comes as any surprise to anybody in this room. The charitable sector is being decimated by the current economic downturn. In the United States, where we have roughly 1.2 million charitable organizations, I expect 100,000 nonprofits to disappear over the coming year. There are conversations about bailouts, but we've got bailout fatigue in the United States right now, and so we're finally getting to the point where we're saying, well, what should we do about saving the nonprofit sector, the charitable sector, and we're kind of out of gas. The Obama administration to be, which will be tomorrow, has been talking about some sort of injection of capital into the nonprofit sector and also stimulation of social entrepreneurship, funding of social entrepreneurship. And that has both positives and negatives. The positive is that government funding is extremely valuable for sustaining and scaling socially entrepreneurial ideas. And many of the success stories in social entrepreneurship have involved government funding of one kind or another. The federal government, state and local governments in the United States are a source of ongoing support. Many of the initiatives worldwide dealing with the eradication of life-threatening disease involve government funding, foreign aid, and assistance of one kind or another. The problem is in the United States, and I know this can't be the case in other nations, there are political interests in funding, in the funding program. And so the question for the Obama administration is whether they could create a funding mechanism that wouldn't turn into a device for favoring certain organizations over others, and whether or not that could be as damaging to social entrepreneurship as the presence of government funding. I'm sort of arguing at this particular point that we need to be very, very careful about setting up a specific fund for encouraging social entrepreneurship within government. The ability to perhaps set up a fund that is quasi-independent may make more sense, so that you don't have the possibility of heavy political influence in support of particular solutions to problems other than sort of a more market-based approach where ideas are allowed to flourish and you're able to basically support the ideas that sort of rise to the top as particularly effective in some sort of a measurable way. So I'm kind of on the outs right now. The Obama administration has been talking about a social entrepreneurship czar. And every time I hear the word czar, and I study government, federal government in particular, and the history of czars in our federal government has been not very glorious. In fact, that was the history of the czar, the last czar in Russia, if I remember correctly. So we call these people czars, and they tend to accrete power and influence, but not necessarily wisdom and foresight. So I'm rather opposed to the notion of yet another czar for our federal government. The Obama administration has been sort of every day announcing a new czar, and I'd rather back off from that particular approach to stimulating social entrepreneurship. I'd rather see more private and philanthropic investment going into the field than specific injections of capital from the federal government.
And are there specific things that the government could do to encourage that kind of private capital activity?
I mean, it could create tax incentives of one kind or another. It could reward contributions of one kind or another. One of our problems is that in the charitable sector, we don't have good measures of social return on investment. So when we start talking about picking the best organization or the best charitable operation to support. In the United States, let's say that we have 100,000 nonprofits go under, and let's say that we had some sort of a bailout fund, a rescue fund, that was dedicated to helping strong nonprofits survive and letting weak nonprofits fold. That might not necessarily be a bad idea in the United States, where the argument could be made that we have too many charities. That might not be an argument that would be well made in Abu Dhabi, for example. But let's say that we wanted to merge or somehow winnow the number of nonprofits in the United States by 10%. Let's say that we thought there were too many charities and we wanted to pick winners and losers and direct funding towards winners. Then we'd need some sort of bottom line measure of which charities to support. And unfortunately, we don't have good indicators for most charitable activities as to whether they're effective to one degree or another. We just haven't developed those indicators well over the years. And I'm not talking about coming up with a mechanical social rate of return on investment or using very blunt data on administrative cost ratios to expenditures. I'm basically saying, well, how would we know a strong nonprofit versus a weak nonprofit, or a good nonprofit versus a poor nonprofit, or a strong socially entrepreneurial organization versus a weak one? And we don't have good metrics to help us make those decisions. So we end up having random, sort of a random winnowing of the charitable sector. And it's really success in the charitable sector, especially among socially entrepreneurial organizations, often has more to do with the charismatic leader and his or her ability to sell the idea than the quality of the idea itself in actually solving a particular problem. Now, that's not to say there are no well-known socially entrepreneurial activities that are, I'm using so many negatives here. There are well-known socially entrepreneurial activities that are successful. And we can go through a list of them. The Institute for One World Health, which is working on a malaria vaccine. We can talk about Axion. We can talk about the Grameen Bank. We can talk about a number of different organizations that are very successful in measurable ways at improving the quality of life and addressing what were once thought to be intractable problems. But for us to invest more effectively, we need better measurement so we can make wiser investments. And that's where the charitable sector often gets into trouble. We can't really estimate what the true effect of a charitable endeavor is beyond the number of people served. We can't really understand whether the quality of life has been positively affected. So this is a struggle we have.
Yeah, and when the NYU Reynolds program started, and we put our definition of social entrepreneurship together, which was based on your work, our definition was pattern-breaking work of social importance done in sustainable and scalable ways. And this notion of sustainability and scalability certainly implies some measurability. And there is a lot of work going on now, I think, with folks like Jed Emerson and B Corp and B Lab in the United States, an organization called Charity Navigator, that are focusing their efforts on trying to come up with these ways to measure the success of different types of social entrepreneurial efforts in different sectors. But it is clearly a long way off before we're really there. So we seem to have this environment where there's debate about this definition. We're not quite sure about the government's role, not entirely clear on how to measure the success of these efforts. If there's somebody who's joined us today and they have an idea for a social entrepreneurial organization, they have a social entrepreneurial idea to address a problem, and we haven't discouraged them yet, and they're looking to you for, what's my first step? What's my biggest obstacle going to be? What would you advise?
You know, I was getting on the flight to Abu Dhabi, and there was a couple with a infant, and that infant was just screaming. I mean, this was an unhappy infant. And I was saying all the way, dear God, please don't sit near me. Please don't sit near me. And this child wailed through the flight so that it didn't matter where you sat. You could hear this. And sometimes I feel like a crying baby on an airplane, like you don't want me to talk to you about the possibility of doing anything. Because I'm just going to say it's impossible, it can't be done. I actually, through this research, came to believe that there is a thing called social entrepreneurship, that it's real. And I found examples of it, and did a good research design and showed differences between socially entrepreneurial organizations and not particularly entrepreneurial organizations. I looked in the private sector, where we see a lot of social entrepreneurship through corporate social responsibility, corporate philanthropy, through the development of products and profitization of ideas that will solve problems that the world confronts. I've looked in government and I've seen social entrepreneurship. Lord, it's difficult in government. It's so difficult to produce change through government, but it is possible. I even looked at the military sector at social entrepreneurship, and that's odd, almost an oxymoron. But I do believe it exists, and it all starts, I believe, with imagination about the possibility that change can occur. That's part of that optimism that I was talking about. I mean, you're going to get nowhere if you don't start out believing that it is possible to reach a new social equilibrium, if you will. You have to have that imagination about the possibility, and then there are a number of steps that move forward from this hopeful, optimistic possibility that, I mean, why would you start something like that if you didn't believe or even have faith that it is possible to achieve success? Well, why bother? I mean, who would start? And then as you move through the process of bringing an idea to fruition and launching it and then scaling it and diffusing it and sustaining it, what I think you need always is this reservoir of sort of optimism about and faith about the possibility of change. I just think that that's essential. You need to look inside yourself. You need to work with others to create this sense of possibility. Because one of the things we learn about changing the status quo, and I don't care whether you're talking about Blu-ray technology or whether you're talking about Nothing But Nets, which is the organization that supplies mosquito nets as part of preventing malaria, or a vaccine for AIDS. I don't care what it is. The minute you start pushing against the status quo is going to come back at you and try to defeat you. It's just inevitable that, it's like we talk about change as if it's, just go out there and make a difference, go out and serve your community and so forth. But the more you push against the prevailing wisdom, the more the prevailing wisdom pushes against you. And that's where this sort of effort to help nascent entrepreneurs sort of harness the skills and the perseverance to survive this pushback is particularly essential. You do have to maintain that optimism in order to survive the pushback. And let me tell you, the conversation that I'm having about social entrepreneurship with the field has provoked pushback. I'm not necessarily the most welcome person at your meeting about how wonderful social entrepreneurship is, because I'm sort of challenging some of these core assumptions, although Gabe and I, we really get along. Yeah, so, we should just touch each other in terms of our basic understandings of inquiry, I suppose. At any rate, I worry about the beginning, where you need to check yourself in terms of your imagination. And I think that's difficult to teach, but certainly possible to encourage.
So from my experience that I've had working with young social entrepreneurs or aspiring social entrepreneurs, certainly that relentless optimism is there, and within the safe confines of a university, there's an opportunity to build that supportive environment for these individuals as they butt up against these challenges, as they face these obstacles along their trajectory. For folks that want to get engaged in this work, aren't in a university program, are there things out there now, online communities, organizations, what have you, that you think provide at least a little bit of that support? Or is this something where, a social entrepreneur needs to step up to the plate and develop that kind of support system if we're genuinely going to encourage this activity?
I think from a tactical perspective, the first step past imagination is to get 2 or 3 people together who share your view of the possibility, to start building a team and network of people who will support you, give you access to capital, give you access to knowledge. There are lots of online communities that encourage social entrepreneurship and social enterprise. Now, I distinguish between social entrepreneurship, which is the pattern-breaking idea, versus social enterprise, which is the revenue-generating activity. In Europe, you can get exactly the reverse. I mean, we throw away and throw around these terms, and it can be very confusing. So you can go online, you can find lots of communities that are talking about this. I think the Stanford Social Innovation Review is a terrific resource and has become bolder over time in terms of challenging the prevailing wisdom. Does microfinance really work? Well, you know, that's a tough question because everybody loves microfinance right now. But maybe it's not a useful way of dealing with poverty.
Can you just very quickly, one sentence, describe exactly what microfinance is for folks that might not know?
Well, microfinance involves very, very small loans given to people who are at the bottom of the economic pyramid to start a business of some kind. Maybe a small shop, or maybe a craft, an effort to sell crafts, or to sew clothing or whatever. These are microloans. I mean, $100, $50. What made the Grameen Bank successful was that the microloans involved groups of women in particularly poor areas of Bangladesh, and the loans involved wraparound services where you talk about health and you talk about social issues in terms of keeping the group together, and there was a reinforcement in the group of basic goals of the microfinance lending, and the repayment rates from these microfinance loans, microloans, have been extremely high. Now the private sector is getting involved in microfinance because, you know, the interest possibilities, the interest rate possibilities, the elasticity in interest rates is pretty significant. And there's a debate going on as to whether or not the private sector should become involved in microfinance, whether the interest rates associated with microfinance are fair, and so on. But in the case of the Grameen Bank and other social entrepreneurial activities, there is this kind of general persistence and effort to scale the idea. And I think microfinance has generally caught on as a anti-poverty measure that works. The question being, can you saturate a community with so much microfinance that you reach a tipping point of of declining marginal returns? I mean, how many small stores can you support? And that becomes part of the question. But I'm not sure I'm responding to your comment per se.
I'm Russell Jones from Khalifa University here in Abu Dhabi. I've heard the financially motivated entrepreneurs talk about being serial entrepreneurs. Those who sell their company, go sit on the beach for about 3 months, get all excited about some new project, throw all their new money into that new project and start all over again and over. And those who fail have the same kind of motivation. Well, I failed this time, but I've got this great new idea for next time, and all I've got to do is find somebody who will give me a little bit more money, and I will get back into the business. Are there serial entrepreneurs on the social side as well?
That's a very interesting question. There are two types of this kind of entrepreneur. There's the serial entrepreneur who moves in sequence, and then there's the portfolio entrepreneur who is sort of at the head of an investment activity and involved in a number of different entrepreneurial engagements at one time. Frankly, in the field of social entrepreneurship, it's so young, and we have spent so much money on sort of getting the idea development, the R&D, and the sort of proof of concept moving forward, that we haven't seen too much of the fully developed, scaled idea to see whether or not there's going to be serial social entrepreneurship. There has been some. So we've seen some people move from one organization to another. What's interesting in the case of social entrepreneurship, however, and with charitable organizations more generally, is that there's such a personal investment in the idea and the organization that it's sometimes difficult for the entrepreneur to let go. This is called in the charitable sector founders syndrome, that we can't get rid of them. That the skills needed to start an idea and to bring it forward through launch are very different from the skills needed perhaps for accelerating the idea and then diffusing it and really pushing it to impact. I can think of a half dozen or so individuals who are serial social entrepreneurs, but not very many. And really what's happening is that most of the people that are working the field that I've come to understand and admire and through case studies are still working the one idea and trying to fine-tune it or somehow expand it so that you're going from one vaccine into another, and you're developing a portfolio of vaccines. But these people in the social entrepreneurship field, they don't go to the beach. They should go to the beach every once in a while because we grind them down. I mean, the physical toll on social entrepreneurs is unbelievable, and the investors in social entrepreneurs really don't care. There really is not much focus on the physical and emotional health of the social entrepreneur. And I mean, it is a very serious problem. In the 3 years that I've been working on this project, among the 200 or so organizations that I've been following that are highly socially entrepreneurial, there's been attrition of about 25% in the senior leadership core. Physical damage, emotional meltdowns, just, really in a very sad and troublesome way. Just the inability to maintain the commitment, this 24/7 perseverance. Because in the charitable sector, we don't invest in organizational capacity. So what's happening in the current recession and the downsizing in the charitable sector is that we're getting rid of capacity. We're saying basically, we're not going to buy that extra computer. We're not going to buy that productivity enhancing software. We're just going to make people work harder on the mission. And people just wear out in the charitable sector. In the private sector, I mean, these are parallel universes that just don't work the same financially. You would continue to invest in the developing idea, and you would ensure that it has capacity. And that's why I tend to think that we're going to see more and more social entrepreneurship coming out of the private sector than expected, or than we would have imagined 10 years ago, because the private sector is much better at honoring its investment. Question being, how much does the private sector want to solve some of the problems that are on the agenda, and how much profit are we willing to pay in order to get the private sector involved, for example, in microfinance. But we have serial entrepreneurs, we have portfolio entrepreneurs, but the entrepreneurs we have the most of is sort of the self-exploiting entrepreneur. They kind of wind themselves up like a mechanical mouse and run until the spring breaks, and that's the problem we're facing, really.
Yeah, there was. I'm reminded of a friend and colleague who's a social entrepreneur who founded an organization in the United States called Little Kids Rock, and he describes himself as somebody who would, and this is a quote, would rather die in a ditch than not bring music education to all public schools in the United States. And that really, I think, illustrates that, psychiatrists would call it obsessive compulsive behavior. Other questions?
Hello, I'm Kenan Ryder from Michigan State University in Dubai.
Thank you.
I did my graduate work in Michigan, so
Good.
I can't be very positive about Michigan State.
Oh, we have a
Although,
football story here.
I'm telling you, well, those of you, this is all inside baseball, but Michigan State's got a pretty good basketball team this year, so they've been fun to watch. If you could get them on television here.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, yeah.
There'd be more Spartans in Dubai if we
Yeah.
could do that. Thank you for coming all this way. We came all the way from Dubai to be here tonight. And
Thank
it's been
you.
very good. Thank you. There's so much talk about social entrepreneurship. In a sense, it's an exotic, almost sexy thing to talk about. But as you say, it's 1 in 10 million. A man's reach must exceed his grasp, of course. But what's the trickle-down effect, I'm wondering, for those who discover that they're not social entrepreneurs? What about social innovation? What's the effect of social entrepreneurship and all the talk about it on social innovation in general, even just plain old social development? Because it seems that we have a difficult enough time helping people to understand how important it is to see needs in the community and meet them.
Well, first of all, I think the odds of finding the entrepreneur are much higher than Bill Drayton's estimate. All right, I mean, and I think we should increase the odds. I mean, I don't think we have to be passive. I think that we can be assertive in trying to increase the odds that social entrepreneurship will blossom. I mean, we have millions of business entrepreneurs, small business in particular, who every year go out against the odds to start small businesses. That's where most jobs are created, and many of them fail, and then they keep going. So the question that comes to my mind is, why do we so underestimate the possibility that we can get similar levels of social entrepreneurship? And then would we really want that much, and how do we make investment choices and so forth, and access to capital? I get confused all the time, all right? I mean, I get confused about the difference between social entrepreneurship and social innovation. I get confused about the difference between social entrepreneurship and social change. Yeah, a lot of people think that social entrepreneurship is the latest fad, and that if you can just repackage what you've already been doing for years and years and call it social entrepreneurship, maybe you'll get some money, maybe you'll get some investment. We got some work to do on clarifying the concept so that it is not just another term for whatever you're already doing. It's like innovation in general. The old definition of innovation was whatever's new to you. Well, in our federal government, push-button telephones are kind of a new thing. We wouldn't call that particularly innovative, but it's whatever's new to you. So we've got some work to do on this issue. It is a hot topic, and people are calling me and saying, well, as Gabe asked, well, what can we do to be socially entrepreneurial? And I break down the components of social entrepreneurship into a set of categories, and really am trying to work on it. I'm convinced that it is a distinctive activity and that we should be careful about using it. I think it's a more frequent activity, and I think it occurs in existing organizations and can occur. Let's imagine some of the existing organizations that have the dissemination networks to really scale up socially innovative ideas. Companies, for example, or large nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity. Imagine for a moment if Habitat for Humanity were to adopt green housing as part of its ethic, that it not only wanted to do something noble by way of building homes, but decided to make them green and to innovate in the development of low-cost housing that is not just energy efficient, but also green. Now, that's an interesting challenge to Habitat because it's an existing organization. It's been around a while. Could they do that? I think social entrepreneurship can be more frequent, but I struggle as you do with what the term means. And that's where I started this project. I was saying, we've been here, done that. It's the same old, same old. But there is something about it that really does focus on the effort to solve a problem. And I've seen lots of innovation in the treatment of problems. More efficiencies, better procedures, more creativity in feeding the homeless and in treating disease. The difference in social entrepreneurship to me that really is fascinating is this notion that, yes, it's a noble thing to feed the homeless or house the homeless or feed the hungry, but can we get rid of homelessness altogether? And how would we do that? And that's what kind of draws you into this conversation, is this focus on solution and the possibility that it's not part of the human condition that we always have homeless. Do you see? I mean, and so as scholars working on these questions, we sometimes become trapped and in love with the concept. This one's pretty alluring to me, and I'm struggling with it. I'm struggling to remain pure, as we must, but to learn as we can.
I'm actually reminded, there's a quote from someone who is a well-recognized social entrepreneur in the United States, a gentleman named Jeffrey Canada, who founded an organization called the Harlem Children's Zone. He is fond of saying walking on water cannot be a requirement for doing this kind of work. And within the discourse in social entrepreneurship, there does seem to be, it feels to me anyway, that there is a move to make it more inclusive. So in addition to identifying these obsessively, compulsively driven, pattern-breaking visionaries, and yes, we could all agree they're social entrepreneurs, perhaps those folks who are going to build and sustain the infrastructure that's required for these ideas to take root and flourish, well, perhaps they're social entrepreneurs as well. I'm talking about the lawyers who will protect the intellectual property of social entrepreneurial organizations, or the accountants who will manage the books of social entrepreneurial organizations. And then a third group that's perhaps being invited into that tent are those who are going to spur others to action through media and the arts. So what about authors like David Bornstein, or people like Stephanie Kanunin, who founded Need magazine? Their tagline is, "We're not out to save the world, but to tell the stories of those who are." Perhaps all of these folks could also be, based on their impact, based on their sustainability, perhaps they're social entrepreneurs as well. On the other side, ensuring we don't water it down too much so it doesn't mean anything.
Well, let me just pivot off that just for a second, because I have met social entrepreneurs who are the most boring people you can imagine. I mean, it's just like, oh my God, I got to spend an hour with this person, Bill Drayton, if you've ever heard Bill Drayton speak, my goodness. It's like, how am I going to stay awake through this thing? And that's probably how you're feeling about me right now. It's like you're struggling. But a lot of the people I've come to admire in this are ordinary people who are extraordinarily committed to a mission. And that's what's driving them. They have this perseverance, but they are seeking a work-life balance. And if we don't get our heads around that, we're in trouble, because the generation that's following us, and I'm just guessing that you and I might be in that cohort. First of all, the generation that's following us can't wait until we're gone. We just need to realize that. We think they love us, but they're saying, get out. at any rate, they want more of a work-life balance, and they have socially entrepreneurial ideas, and it can't be the price of destroying your life and not having a life to be a social entrepreneur. I had a conversation with somebody about this, and we were talking about what kind of animals could social entrepreneurs have as pets. And we decided that a social entrepreneur, as described in the field, could never have a dog because they could never get home in time to walk the dog. They could never have a cat because you have to feed a cat at least once a month and change the litter box on occasion. That maybe a turtle would do. But even there, you have to feed it at some point. So at the end of the day, the image of the social entrepreneur is of this charismatic, tap dancing, 24/7 type A, never sleep, no relationships with anyone or anything kind of person. And it's not true. It's just not true. It's part of the mythology of the field that these are the heroes. And they are inspirational. But when you sit down and have a conversation, they work in teams. They're developing ideas in teams. We just can't reward teams. We're not used to doing that. But there's a lot of ordinary people who can do this, who have that perseverant optimism, but we need to make it easier. And I think Gabe is quite right on the notion of the infrastructure. And, we're both in the academic world. We have to believe that it's possible to teach how to do this. So there's...
I thought we were keeping it sexy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and have fun doing it. So there you go.
Hi. Thank you both for coming and talking about the subject. My name is Rama Shakaki, and with my partner here, we founded a company about 3 years ago to invest in social and environmental entrepreneurs in the region. And it's been a battle of optimism. I mean, we've really had to stay very positive. Everything you've described, we've seen in the field, from the lone wolf syndrome, or what you've mentioned. But one of the biggest challenges we faced here is trying to explain to the private sector or justify investment in social entrepreneurship with the crazy economy that is happening in the UAE and the region at large. They could not understand anything that would bring in a return on investment that's less than 20%. So how do you convince them? And then, if you talk to them about the social change or the benefit that this is going to bring, they see it as the role of the government. So we really felt we were in a very difficult spot to try and get anybody to invest in these social and environmental entrepreneurs. That's changing a little bit, but I would like to see how, if there's anything we're missing in terms of trying to lure in investment from the private sector, or even get the attention of the government sector to allow us to work with them on these types of issues.
Well, I'd point you to some research done by the Heron Fund, Heron, which has done some studies of social investing, rates of return on social investing versus traditional, looking at standard measures of rates of return from, index funds of one kind or another. What they found was that there is a lower rate of return from social investing, but it's not much lower. I mean, we're not talking about dramatic spreads. We're talking about relatively small spreads, 1%, 1.5%. And given public attitudes towards the private sector right now, and given the pressure from the public to re-regulate, it makes some sense, just from a corporate marketing standpoint, to be investing in socially entrepreneurial activity. And the profitability from socially entrepreneurial activity may be significant as well. In the United States, my argument is that, in terms of corporate social responsibility, that corporate social responsibility has to involve investing in corporate or in socially entrepreneurial activity. That's part of corporate social responsibility and should be factored in our measures of it. And believe me, a lot of private companies in the United States look at corporate social responsibility as a marketing ploy, but people are getting much more serious about the reality underpinning it. So you have to make your case in terms of why it would be good and the reality for the organization, the company, to invest, but also show that the rates of return are not necessarily as low as you'd think. I mean, the rates of return now from microfinance are astounding. And that's why the banking industry is getting involved. And it's getting to the point now where we're thinking about regulating the banking industry for charging egregiously high interest rates on microloans. So you know the argument about the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid and so forth. But I just see that, the social entrepreneurship is not just a phenomenon in the charitable sector. It's a phenomenon in government, and it's a phenomenon in the corporate sector. Government is not great at doing socially entrepreneurial, at least in the United States, at socially entrepreneurial activity. And we have to work very hard with the infrastructure in that regard. What did you call it? You had a term for bureaucracy that was particularly artful. Civil society infrastructure. Civil support structure. So that's a very artful way of putting it. So I think you have to make your case based on what's available. I'd look at the Heron Fund and take a look at that research. I thought it was very persuasive. There is an argument afoot that charitable organizations, as well as some wealth funds, should put half of their portfolios into social investments and make that capital work at two levels, so that they're giving money off of their asset growth, but they're also investing in socially entrepreneurial activity to maintain their assets themselves. And that is a movement taking root in the philanthropic community in the United States. And we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I'll add to that. There are two funds that you might want to take a look at that seem to illustrate this split between one camp says social entrepreneurial investors need to understand that they are going to accept a lower rate of return, and the other camp says that's ridiculous. You can't possibly say that to an investor. These investments can be made in a way to ensure market rates of return. And on the first side, there's a gentleman named Woody Tesh who founded Investors Circle, just came out with a book called Slow Money, and it's an investment fund for small food businesses in the United States. And then on the other side, there's a new fund called Uhuru Capital that was founded in part by a gentleman named Jed Emerson, who's one of the leading thinkers in the social entrepreneurial community around blended value propositions, and this notion that, yes, there's an environmental, a social, and an economic return to all efforts, whether you're a business, a not-for-profit, or a social entrepreneurial organization. And they're putting together their investment fund, ideally promising traditional rates of return, but investing in social entrepreneurial and organizations or social ventures or social enterprises.
And just a final point, which is on the profitization argument, that many of the socially entrepreneurial charities will eventually reach a scale-up point where profitization, partnership with private firms, is going to be essential for scale-up to sustainable impact. And that is a very significant source of profitability. You're really talking about investing in the pipeline. at the front end of the pipeline and getting in at that particular point. And you should talk to Gabe about what was the first fund?
Investor Circle.
Yeah, and their investments in Stony Brook Farms yogurt,
Yeah.
which was bought out by Dannon. I'll tell you, I would have rather had stock in Stony Brook than what I had stock in, if you get my drift. You know. So anyway, one more question, perhaps.
One or two more, I think.
Yeah.
My name's Samantha Taylor. I'm a Canadian high school senior here in Abu Dhabi, and I'm graduating this year, headed off to university, and I'm planning on studying engineering. But I'm also very interested in social entrepreneurship, social change, NGOs, that type of thing. And so I was wondering if you had any ideas for someone in my position, who's just getting started, as to what I could get involved in, how to get started, as well as if you knew anything about the linkages between engineering and entrepreneurship, where they cross and what the opportunities are there.
Go ahead.
Great question. Thank you. First piece of advice I would offer is certainly come to NYU and apply to the NYU Reynolds program. Second bit of advice is around the opportunities. One of the things that the Reynolds program is trying to do is embrace this notion that social entrepreneurship is a much larger meta profession, under which many different professions can fall. And consequently, we have medical school students, law school students, business school students, and now engineering students. And it's a perfect example of how social entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurial thinking really has to cross these boundaries. One organization that you should definitely take a look at, and I learned about this through one of our fellows who's one of its founders, is called Engineers Without Borders. And so here's a great example of engineers coming together globally, setting up local chapters, and then being dispatched to different regions of the world that have very specific engineering needs. Now, one of the experiences he had when he did his work with Engineers Without Borders was he came to understand we can't just engineer our way out of these problems. So you have a village, the village needs a well, they need a bridge, they need a new building, what have you. That's critical. But unless you have other people with different skill sets supporting those efforts, it's not going to have the long-term, sustainable, scalable, desired change for that, for that area. And so what attracted him to the Reynolds program was connecting with those other people. So I would suggest certainly getting involved in those types of organizations, but being very aware of what are the other skill sets that you need, and who are the other types of people you want to pull in your network to kind of round that out. If you're going to be doing the engineering and you want to have an organization that does X, you might want to have somebody else run that organization for you, kind of thing.
Just quickly, I participated in the development marketplace at the World Bank a couple of years ago, and annually a number of projects competing for small grants. And one of the most interesting projects, and maybe it was just me, and I gave this particular project fairly high scores, was a packing system for camels for remote medical assistance. Somebody had just figured out how to pack the camel differently and add more weight and more supplies, and it was an engineering problem. What do we know about packing? So there's just so many ways in where sort of a systematic engineering mind can be of help. Because you're dealing with people who are like philosophy majors, and we need more engineers, and just pursue it. You can make it happen.
Yeah, there's also, I would pay attention to, there seems to be more social venture business competitions around design and engineering that are popping up. There's one called Social Change Through Design that's sponsored by the Milano School of Business in partnership with the Parsons School of Design, and taking a look at who's winning those awards, the types of things that they're doing. one other question, I think.
I don't know that you get two questions because you're a partner.
Oh, we'll be here afterwards, certainly.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. So I am Isabelle Lebon from NATAM, Social Advertising. I think it's a kind of social business enterprise. So we have set up this just recently in Abu Dhabi. And we faced a big issue because there's no legal framework here for a social business enterprise. So I was going to ask you, is there something already done in the States? This is my first question, and how we could take a look at it. And secondly, how do you measure the social return on investment? How do you measure the well-being of the community? Because what we are trying to do is to improve the well-being of the community, not only with figures, but with maybe there's some research on that we can look at.
Answer the first.
Excellent question. Thank you. It's certainly a big issue. There needs to be a new legal entity for organizations that exist in that space between the for and the not-for-profit world. One organization and one individual that I'm aware of in the U.S. that seems to be making the most progress on this front or doing some of the most exciting work. One is an organization called B Corp/B Lab. You'll find it if you Google B Corporation, founded by a gentleman named Andrew Kasoy. And what they're trying to do is create a competitive legislative environment in the United States. So the individual states are competing to be the place to be if, for corporations to incorporate if they want to be seen as responsible corporate citizens. And they enjoyed some progress. They got a bill all the way on the gubernator's desk, Arnold Schwarzenegger in California, that wanted to change the incorporation bylaws in California. So if you were going to incorporate in California, your bylaws had to say our primary responsibility is to our shareholders, which it says now, comma, and related stakeholders. And it's just those few words have huge implications for taxation, how dividends are distributed, what types of activities you can engage in. So that's one organization that I think is doing something very exciting. The other is a gentleman named Alan Bromberger, who's a partner at a law firm called Perlman and Perlman in New York. He's been quietly acting as the lawyer to social entrepreneurs for the last 15 or 20 years. So when somebody does get to scale and they're very serious and let's say they're getting ready to open up en masse 20 branches of a biodiesel gas station, right? He'll help them with that. So he's got a lot of experience in a sort of one-off legal needs of social entrepreneurial organizations, and is doing a lot of work around the thinking of the new legal entity and what the implications would be around taxation and dividend distribution. But it's a huge issue, and I think one that's very exciting when you think, in the U.S., the limited liability partnership, which is how business is done, kind of cropped up around 1985, 86. And just a ton of business activity wound up getting generated because of that new legal entity. So I think that's one of these infrastructure issues that's really critical.
And they're struggling with definitions of the limited liability corporation now to see if we can find some sort of variation on it that would help social entrepreneurship. On measuring outcome, it's very difficult. Social rate of return on investment, it's been very difficult. But if you cannot tell me in a sentence how your theory of change is going to make the quality of life better, then you're already at a deficit in terms of donor willingness to invest. I often speak to nonprofit board members and communities, and I say, tell me what you got that you think can't be measured. And I've never been stumped. So if you've got something you think can't be measured, let me know, and we'll talk about it afterwards. And see if you're the first. Because, we can get some sort of qualitative or quantitative indicator to make the case that you are changing the quality of life in your community. And we have to struggle with that. but it ain't going to be as precise as a rate of return on investment. It's going to be something where we can show the theory of change and how it might alter, and some measurable surrogates for social rate of return. So let's talk, okay?
Lots more talk, I hope. Thank you very, very much, Gabe and Paul, both. I really want to thank you for a very nuanced discussion of this term social entrepreneurship that you've certainly made me see and think about a little differently. I have to admit, I didn't want to say it before the meeting, that I was one of the skeptics too, because I always thought it was a contradiction in terms, the term. And now the term social appears to me differently in that you've sort of demythologized the idea of the singular genius that goes at it and fights all these obstacles. So the social entrepreneurship itself emerges as a social activity in its own right. So I found that extremely inspiring, despite your best efforts not to send us out Pollyanna style. I truly found it an inspiring discussion. And thank you all for participating in it so vigorously.